I read once there are two ways wars start, through calculation and through miscalculation. We may now have seen both in the ongoing open military conflict between Israel and Iran.
Fears of escalation this morning after an apparent Israeli attack on Iranian soil.
Word of a reported deadly Israeli airstrike in Syria. The targets, Iran's embassy in the capital, Damascus.
Iran tonight launched a swarm of drones at Israel as air defenses lit up the sky and exploded over Jerusalem.
The last 3 weeks have been dizzying because we have never seen such open hostility between Israel and Iran in the many decades that they've spent fighting each other indirectly through proxy groups, cyber attacks, covert operations. And now, with what's widely believed to be Israel's latest retaliatory strike on Iran.
Overnight, there were reports of explosions in the area of the city of Isfahan. It is, as you say, a significant city, an important military base there, also those sites associated with Iran's nuclear program.
What we have had is a series of terrible miscalculations in an area, in a neighborhood that really can't afford any.
So the question now is that it, or is there more? First, let me be clear. This will not be an explanation of the decades of violence and animosity between Israel and Iran. That's a history lesson too big for this moment. What I will try to do is show what very specifically and recently led to this dramatic military scale-up, to the point where experts and governments alike genuinely feared the outbreak of a wider regional war in the Middle East. So let's start with April 1st.
Iranian state media says a suspected Israeli strike has destroyed an Iranian embassy building in the Syrian capital, Damascus.
That building, part of Iran's embassy complex in Syria, was utterly destroyed. 11 people dead, including 2 of Iran's most senior military commanders. Immediately, there were questions. What has Israel just done?
The fact that it targeted a diplomatic facility, the Israeli attack on the consulate in Damascus was viewed in Iran as an escalatory move, a provocation, and one that required a significant and, as it turns out, unprecedented response.
Any Iranian embassy or consulate is legally Iranian soil, making this one of the most overt attacks on the country we've seen. U.S. officials were widely cited in American media as having been blindsided by the attack, given as little as 5 minutes warning from Israel before it happened. And more jarring than that, there were questions about whether Israel drastically underestimated Iran's capacity and willingness to hit back.
کنسولگری ما حمله میکنن مثل اینکه به خاک ما حمله کردن. این عرف دنیاست. رژیم خبیث اشتباه کرد. در این قضیه باید تنبیه بشود و تنبیه خواهد شد.
For its part, an Israeli spokesperson told CNN,
"This is no consulate and this is no embassy. This is a military building of Quds forces disguised as a civilian building in Damascus."
Understand, Israel has been in open conflict with Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and Houthis in Yemen and the Red Sea. All three funded, trained, supported by Iran. Their collective response promised revenge, and it came less than 2 weeks later.
The major escalation in the Middle East.
Iran launched barrages of explosive drones and missiles at Israel into the early hours of Sunday.
For the last several minutes, we've seen these flares streaking all across the skies.
Until Saturday, April 13th, we had never seen an attack so direct, so large by Iran on Israeli territory. It came from several directions, multiple countries with ties to Iran. A staggered attack of one-way attack drones, cruise missiles, longer-range ballistic missiles. More than 300 units in all coordinated to strike Israel at roughly the same time.
Iran wanted to hit Israel back. It actually hit back very hard with about 300 missiles and drones. But at the same time, Iran was surprisingly transparent, not only publicly, but also privately through diplomatic back channels to the US and Israel to clearly signal that an attack was coming. And the objective here on Iran's part was to limit the physical damage while still making the political point of retaliation, again, so as to try to avoid escalation.
Israel's triple layer of missile defense destroyed most of the incoming drones and missiles, but not all. Reportedly, about a dozen missiles got through, damaging a military airbase and severely injuring a 7-year-old girl. And this attack drew other major countries into play. The US, UK, France, Jordan, Saudi Arabia. They all played roles in either directly defending or providing intelligence to Israel to help fend off the attack. So the fear was, is this spiraling out of control?
So the concern was, Iran, by taking this unprecedented measure and attacking Israel directly, would further escalate the confrontation and compel Israel to attack Iran proportionally, which would mean a direct Israeli strike on Iranian territory. So it was Iran crossing a very significant Rubicon in that regards.
There were international calls, including from the UN, for the fighting to stop. The US, Israel's closest, most influential ally, urged restraint. Iran said it considered the conflict closed. There were very few players who seemed eager for an all-out war.
In such a scenario, everybody suffers, including Israel and the US, but Iran probably suffers the most because militarily, in conventional terms, Israel and the US are much more powerful than Iran. So over the years, we've seen Iran provoking, but always calibrating its provocation so that it avoids that escalation scenario.
It does seem that both countries, Israel and Iran, do not want to further escalate.
But despite this, Israel said it would not, could not let it go. The earliest reports that Israel was making good on its threat of revenge were pretty alarming.
Iran will face the consequences for its actions. We will choose our response accordingly.
Iran's airspace was closed off. Multiple news agencies reported for hours into the night. Questions about the scale of the attack, what was damaged. What about nuclear fallout? Yeah, Isfahan is one of Iran's largest cities. 2 million people live there. It's also where Iran makes weapons, missiles, and deep underground, a nuclear site.
Now, this is new video into us this morning. It's eyewitness footage shot earlier today of a nuclear facility in Iran's Isfahan province. That is where Iranian officials say air defense batteries fired during the reported Israeli strike.
That nuclear site, we now know from the UN's nuclear watchdog, is safe. No damage to Iran's nuclear sites, it reported online. With a reminder, for the love of God, don't shoot the nukes. We've since heard from Iranian state media and a spokesperson for Iran's civilian cyberspace program that the attack was made up of several small drones, quadcopters maybe, and that many, if not all, were shot down.
The nature of this attack and Iran's response to it suggests that this will also be viewed as a de-escalatory move. This is likely a calculated move by Iran's government to continue the de-escalatory cycle and remove pressure that Iran may feel to further retaliate against Israel in the short term.
Targeting an area home to a nuclear facility. I've heard at least one expert suggest there may have been a menacing message wrapped into what ultimately was a small-scale attack. But Israel hasn't even taken direct responsibility for what happened. Iran hasn't announced any plan to retaliate. It spent the earliest hours denying that there even was an attack. So, does this represent a reassuring climb down, a journey to the brink and back?
Iran and Israel have moved their confrontation to a new and potentially more dangerous level. The shadow war is a shadow war no longer. I think the events of the last few weeks should give us all pause as far as concluding that we're out of the woods and that the escalatory cycle has truly ended.